Hello and welcome to this panel discussion entitled Happiness Through Design. This is produced in association with the RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, and first recorded for the Virtual Homebuilding and Renovating Show. My name is Michael Holmes, and I've been writing on the subject of home design for well over 30 years now. Now, Winston Churchill famously said, "You are where you live." And today's panel discussion explores the influence that our homes have on our individual happiness and well-being. Now, this is particularly pertinent at a time when we are all spending so much more time in our homes in an attempt to slow down the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Royal Institute of British Architects has conducted a piece of research looking at how the British public feel the way they live has changed during the 2020 lockdown and how this has affected their mental health and what changes they feel they could potentially make to their home to improve their quality of life, health and well-being. To discuss this, I'd like to welcome our two panelists. The first is Dr. Eleanor Ratcliffe. She's the lecturer in environmental psychology at the University of Surrey. Eleanor's research and teaching focuses on environment and well-being, and specifically how certain spaces and places can help us to feel happier, less stressed, and to perform better in our daily lives. She also examines how attachment to place influences these outcomes and how we can design buildings and services to benefit our well-being. Eleanor, welcome. Tell us a little bit about your work and particular areas of interest and what brought you to the subject.
Well, I'm an academic environmental psychologist. So like you said, I look at the relationship between people and place and specifically how it affects them psychologically. So I'm very interested in what we call restorative environments. So how places can help us to recover after stress and fatigue, and also how we're attached to particular places in our lives, for example, the home.
Very interesting. Our second guest is Ben Channon. Ben is an architect, author, TEDx speaker and mental wellbeing advocate. He's the head of wellbeing at Assael Architecture, where he heads up the practice's research into this area and advises teams on how to design healthier buildings. Ben's research into the relationship between buildings and happiness formed the basis of his first book, Happy by Design, which explores how spaces can impact how we feel, think, and even behave. Ben, what inspired you to explore this relationship between the design of our environment and surroundings and our sense of health and well-being?
Yeah, good question. So it actually started for me kind of when I was in my mid-20s. I trained as a fairly traditional architect, but I actually had some problems with my own mental health in my mid-20s. Basically, to burn myself out, I was working much too hard and kind of ended up just giving myself a whole raft of problems with my mental health, really, which thankfully I got really good help for and managed to get through that. But at the time I was living in a shared house full of young professionals, and I think there was about 6 of us sharing a sort of Victorian terrace. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, I think the entire time I lived in that house, we drew the curtains about 3 times. Never any daylight in there. It was constantly a mess. And I started to realize that actually where I was living was having an impact on how I felt and on my mental health, just as much as all of the other factors. And as an architect, I became kind of more curious about that and started researching it and discovered work that, a lot of amazing environmental psychologists like Eleanor were doing, and really wanted to try and communicate that back to the architectural industry.
Oh, that's fascinating. So it's from personal experience, in fact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, welcome, Ben. And so let's move on to the first of our discussion points today, because the Royal Institute for British Architects has commissioned some research following lockdown. And it's looked at how homeowners have been affected by lockdown and the experience of being locked up with their families for extended periods in the home with one period of exercise a day. And it particularly looks at how the design of their current home has affected their mental well-being during lockdown. It's found that people are feeling more stressed, more anxious, and more depressed. Ellie, what does this tell us, do you think, about society?
Well, it's told us, I think, first of all, that we've gone through a very significant period of stress and change to our daily routines. But also, I think it's telling us that the spaces around us have a really significant impact on the way we're thinking and feeling, behaving, and our psychological function. And we're having to spend more and more time in our homes, and we're using them in ways we would never have had to think we would use them before. So normally the home is somewhere where you go to recover from all these stresses and strains, but now the home has to be the office, the school for many people as well, where you entertain your children. And then somehow it's got to fulfill all those functions and be the place where you go to recover from doing all of these things. And that's not just for us as individuals, but also anyone we live with at the same time. And so I think quite a lot of people might actually realize now that their home, as it's been designed, doesn't cater for all these different uses and user groups. And then maybe there are some changes that they want to make that they hadn't had to think about before.
And do you think that association of space with the transition from work to relaxation, or for children, the transition from school to relaxation, once people start to understand that, does that start in itself to unlock the issue, do you feel?
Yeah, and I guess it's having that time to think about it as well. So maybe when coronavirus happened and lockdown started, people were just kind of scrambling to get through the situation. But as the months have gone by, I think people have had more time to reflect on things they want and need from their home. And now maybe it's time to take action. That's
a fascinating insight. It's something that just had never occurred to me, that it's actually that change of space that allows people to change mindsets. And they're so used to that. Spending all their time in one place just takes that away from them completely. Very, very interesting. Ben, what are your thoughts? Do you feel that it's understandable that spending all our time in one space, even though it's our home, even if a lot of people being at home more sounded like a dream?
Absolutely. And to some extent it has been. I think in some ways we're finding now we're returning to the office. I'm recording this in our office, and for some of us, we couldn't wait to get back to the office. I live in a pretty small flat myself, and so I completely can empathise with that feeling of being in a very small space. But other people actually have quite enjoyed elements of it. They've enjoyed getting a bit more sort of commute time back, having more time in their day. Some people have enjoyed, spending more time with family and things like that. And I think it is interesting how it has varied from person to person. But we interestingly did a survey here at Assael too. And we surveyed it wasn't just within our company, we surveyed more broadly, put it out on social media and things. And we found largely similar results to what the RIBA have been finding, which is that people have found it really has had overall a kind of an impact on their mental health. And it probably isn't really surprising, given that there's certain elements we could probably go into in a bit more depth, but things like privacy are so important to us as humans. And when you live in a house, we tend to pretty much buy, because houses are quite expensive, we tend to buy houses where we can all just about fit into. We can just about fit our lives into that house, and therefore we do tend to be kind of on top of each other. We certainly, during lockdown, I'm sure we've all experienced that feeling of just wanting to kind of have our own space, have a bit more privacy, and things like that have been stripped away from us to an extent during COVID. So absolutely, we're seeing now a lot of people wanting to make changes to their homes, whether that's wanting to extend, add a study, add another bedroom, just to try and get a bit more of that privacy back and a bit more of a sense of space as well. But we found some really interesting results. People really value things like natural light, access to greenery, green space in their homes. And so, it's going to be interesting how we take those lessons forward as architects now.
Thinking back to your own experience of a number of students living together in one small space, the curtains were never open, do you think that there are some differences in the response to lockdown from different age groups? Does it depend on your age, your demographic, and also the house you're living in, the space you're living in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it does. Of course, you're going to have had a vastly different experience if you're living in 35 metre squares, one bedroom apartment, to if you're living in a 6-bedroom house in the countryside with an enormous garden. Your experience of lockdown will have been vastly different. And I think we are seeing that reflected now as well. Obviously, in the housing market, lots of people are looking to move house. And as Ellie pointed out, it's really drawn people's attention to the fact that our home does have a huge impact on how we feel and on our happiness. And, the design of our home, the layout of our home plays a huge impact on our happiness too.
And Ellie, do you think that everybody responds in the same way, or are certain types of personality, certain types of person influenced, more strongly than others?
Yeah, I think there's really not a one size fits all solution or one way in which people are reacting to spending more time in their home. It really depends, like you say, on demographics, so differences in age and gender, how people are making use of their home now versus before. So whether there's been a change in what they're doing at home, obviously that will influence how people feel about what they're having to do there. And also lifestyle, if someone was quite used to spending a lot of time at home, maybe they haven't experienced such a shift. But for people for whom this is something very different, they're going to have a very different kind of experience as well. In terms of personality types, I'm not aware of research on that, but that's very interesting. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that would be very interesting to find out more. Of course, you then need to try and understand the different personality types in the first place, which is a challenge in itself, of course. So moving on to a second question, given the changes in lifestyle and the patterns of lifestyle with homeschooling, home working, often people live in multi-generational households. So you could have people, retired people and people working and people in lessons all at the same time. How has that affected? And do you think these are short-term or long-term changes, that the impact on people's lives?
Well, that's really the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think when lockdown started, most of us, even the most pessimistic of us, probably thought, well, this will all sort of be over and done with by Christmas. And now, who knows where we'll be by Christmas? Who knows where we'll be by mid-2021? I mean, obviously, we all really hope that we can get back to normal life as quickly as possible, but we don't know what the long-term implications of this are going to be. They say it takes around 3 months for a new habit to really become cemented in as a habit. And we've certainly been dealing with this problem for more than 3 months now. So it wouldn't surprise me if we did see some longer term behavioural changes. Even reading this week about the fact that makeup sales have reduced because people are having less face-to-face meetings and things like that. And the makeup industry is now seriously concerned. This could be a long-term thing. This could have a real long-term impact. So when we look at something like our homes, I really wouldn't be surprised if it has a long-term impact too, because it looks like the live-work balance is shifting. People are more, employers are becoming happier to let staff work more flexibly. So we are, I imagine, going to see people wanting their homes to work a bit harder for them, because as Ellie pointed out, they're their creches, they're their schools, they're their offices. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if people want to A, see homes that work harder for them, and B, homes that are better quality, because if we're spending more time in there, we should justifiably be spending more money on our homes to make them a better place for us to live and work. So this could mean really proper home offices. I'm not sure about you guys, but most home offices that I've ever seen tend to be kind of a desk and a chair that someone's managed to get secondhand. But actually what we really need is really high quality office space in the home for a lot of people now. This could be within the home, could be a separate outdoor space. We're seeing a real rise in that now. But I can also imagine perhaps a move away from traditional, like the kind of open plan housing that we've become quite used to. And I'm not necessarily saying that this will mean people putting lots of walls up everywhere and splitting their house into lots of tiny rooms like a Cluedo board, but it might mean, some more intelligent design moves, some more sensitive designs where, things like partitioning, furniture, sliding elements, bookcases could be used to sort of subdivide spaces and actually increase the sense of privacy even within an open plan design.
Yeah, I mean, I had sort of assumed that it was really just to do with space, and that people who lived in bigger households would be less stressed. But actually, Ellie, you made the point about the transition from one space to another, and is it about having a sense of transition, perhaps, rather than just having lots of space? That so you can psychologically move from one space where you are working to another space where you associate the space with relaxation, etc. For all the different, same with education for children.
Yeah, I think that's going to be something that's really important, this idea of kind of zoning, because, for example, research at Surrey has shown that a lot of people are more interested in spending more time from working from home, even not in a COVID context now. They've kind of had a taste of what it's like, and they want to do that more with the blessing of their employer. But with that comes this kind of mashing up of work and home life. And so I think it's not just a matter of having more space, but being smarter with what you're doing with that space and making it feel, like you say, like you have some separation between work and home and kind of the domestic sphere. I think that's really important psychologically, because even though people may not have enjoyed their commute very much, it was this idea of a transition from work to home and kind of having that space to, decompress from whatever was going on before. So maybe we need to find ways to make the architecture of our homes provide that kind of transitionary experience, or at least provide a space where we can leave work behind and then go to be with our family life or home life or whatever it is we want to do.
And it's interesting, you were referring to a move perhaps away from open plan living. I mean, that was obviously seen as the ideal of a fully open plan space where you can enjoy all of the space all of the time and then have a seamless flow. But there has been a move towards more broken plan living, as it's referred, with semi-open plan spaces and transitions between spaces just through ceiling heights, floor levels, all sorts of other devices that make an otherwise open plan space feel individual and separate. Do you think that's going to accelerate that? This is going to accelerate that trend in that direction, something that was already, in other words, beginning to emerge?
Yeah, potentially. I think you've hit the nail on the head there in the sense that it's not necessarily about splitting spaces up. It's more suggesting separation of spaces through architectural treatments, through clever design features. And as you say, more sensitive moves like a slightly different ceiling height, things like that can suggest different zones. In my book, I argue in favour of open plan living because there's a lot of benefits to it. Loneliness is it's a really major problem at the moment both in the UK and worldwide. And the health impact of loneliness, lack of social interaction can be huge, particularly in terms of mental health. So absolutely, we still want homes that really allow people to socialise, that really encourage interaction. But I think it's about getting that balance with those other elements. And as I said earlier, we have lost a lot of our privacy this year. It's been a year where we've all really been forced on top of each other for a lot of time. And so I can imagine that we will be looking at homes. There will be a desire for homes where people can just create slightly more of a sense of zoning, and people can socially interact if they want to, but also achieve that privacy and that decompression if they need to.
And Ellie, do you feel it's accelerating social change that was already beginning to happen, or is this completely sent us off on a different tangent, the idea of lockdown and open up a whole different approach to the way we live and what we need from our homes?
Well, I think it's been a very profound experience for a lot of people. I mean, like Ben was saying, there's this aspect of loneliness as well. So maybe we've had this vision of people being all cramped up in a home together, and for many people that might be how it's been, but for many other people who live alone, they've had quite a different kind of experience. So I think we need to make sure we're catering for lots of different kinds of people. And again, like I said, it's kind of individual experience. I don't think anyone has experienced this in exactly the same kind of way. So there's no single answer.
It's very interesting as well that, when I grew up, giving away my age, there were very few television channels, and TV was experienced by the whole family in the only room in the house that had any sort of television. And so it was very much a shared experience, and we all sort of, got on. And now everybody's got devices and everybody's doing something different on the screen or on a phone or on a tablet, usually in a different space. Now, how can that work if you're all sharing the same space? That must be an absolute nightmare. So what do you feel the link is between our homes and our health and happiness, Ali? How is that link explained?
Well, you started off this panel with a really nice quote about home is related to who you are, and that's something we know very much from environmental psychology. So the home is a very significant place to people. For a lot of people, it can be their favourite place or one they feel very emotionally attached to. So you can be attached to a place in the same way as you might be attached to a person, to a loved one. And home is, for most people, somewhere that provides them with comfort. It supports their sense of identity. So a home that's designed in a way that kind of reflects who you are and your values and interests. Are you a family person? Do you care about the environment? Are you an arty person? A home that reflects that can really make people feel good about themselves and like they know who they are. And it's also true that a home that meets your needs and is designed to support the things you want and need to do, it can also make you feel more in control of what's going on in your life. And at a time when I think life feels very uncertain, I mean, life is always uncertain, but I think we felt it more now than ever. Having an environment that can give you that sense of control, like you know what's going on in your life, can really be helpful to people. And I think more broadly, we know also there are certain sensory experiences or aspects of the physical environment that can really help people on a kind of a general level and are important to maximize in the home. So access to daylight, experience of nature, good noise insulation to help with things like acoustic privacy, access to good quality air. All of these things are linked to health and psychological well-being. And good design can maximize the extent to which people are able to access those resources and then help them feel happier and less stressed and able to perform better in things they do in their life.
Ben?
Well, I mean, what is there to say? What an answer from Ellie. No, that I think really, you've basically just given a synopsis of everything I wrote in my book. So it was great. But no, I completely agree. You know, the work that researchers like Ellie's doing are revealing new things to us all the time about that relationship and the importance of home and the importance of spaces that we spend our time in. And it was really interesting. I've obviously been talking about this subject for some years now. And I think before all this happened, there were probably a few people out there who were a bit dubious, a bit doubtful. Does our environment really impact how we feel? But I think having gone through that lockdown experience, we're seeing pretty much everyone's come on board now with understanding that where we spend time really does have an enormous impact on our health and our well-being. And as humans, we spend about 90% of our time inside buildings. Obviously, this year it's probably been even higher than that. So generally, like, buildings are having an impact on us almost all of the time. They're having an impact on how we feel and on how we behave. You know, there's even amazing research looking at prisons where you can see in prisons where if ceilings are higher in cells, actually they see rates of prisoner violence go down because, you know, what they're saying is that there's increased sense of personal space. People are getting less frustrated, less anxious. So actually, our built environment does have an enormous impact on us, and our homes too have a massive impact, not just on our happiness, but actually on our health too. There's loads and loads of data now available about the materials that are being used in our homes and how healthy actually they are. As architects, we're focusing more and more on specifying healthier materials that don't give off nasty gases, and the internal quality of the air in our homes is just as important as the quality of the air outside too. In fact, if we're spending 90% of our time there, even more important. So these are all things we need to consider.
That's a very interesting point, because I think that we've all assumed the issue has been largely about space and being cooped up and unable to spend much time outside. But actually, it must have brought to the fore the quality of British housing, because it's not great. Especially some of the older housing stock is in very poor condition, especially some of the rental stock is extremely damp, poorly insulated, so difficult to keep warm. And if people are spending extended periods of time in this sort of environment, never mind their mental health, it must be really impacting on their physical health, and then in turn that must impact on your mental health as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I was speaking to a few MPs about this just ahead of lockdown. I went to a really interesting talk at Westminster, and it was about the quality of housing and the impact that was having on people's mental health. And one of the biggest complaints that most MPs tend to get is about the quality of housing stock, and particularly in relation to damp and mold. Unfortunately, it does just seem to be a problem that is, across the whole country. And when that's happening, of course, it's having a really negative impact on your physical health. But as you said, it also affects you psychologically. You're scared about what this might be doing to your body. Your home no longer becomes a safe place, somewhere you feel protected and sheltered. So psychologically, it has a big impact on you. And yeah, and that's exactly why it's so important that we are designing good homes, proper homes, fit for habitation, but also really well detailed and considered.
Now, Ellie, we talked a lot about the space and the design of this space. We haven't really touched at all upon the sort of urban, rural issue too. Now, there's been a sense from media coverage that the poor people cooped up in urban centres are suffering far more than the lucky souls who have all the space around them living in the suburbs or even better in rural areas. Now, is that true? Is there some truth in that, or is that just assumption?
Well, it's very interesting you say that, because at Surrey, some colleagues of mine have just started a research project looking at people's experiences of an access to nature before and during, and then in the long term after COVID. But certainly what we're hearing anecdotally is that people who have been able to access outside space, whether that's, a garden or high quality local park or wider areas of nature, they've maybe been better able to deal with the stress of lockdown. So certainly I think there's an issue there about access to outside space. And we know from the literature more broadly that when people engage with the outdoors, they have a better quality of life, they feel happier, less stressed, more able to cope with everyday challenges. So I think that's certainly going to be another thing, allowing people to engage with nature, whether that's from within their home or maximising outdoor space as well. This is really something we should be focusing on.
I took a look at the research from the Royal Institute of British Architects piece, and I was surprised to find that only 11% of people said that they were looking to move to a more rural environment. And interestingly, 6% of people said they'd always dreamed of moving to an urban environment. So there was nothing in the research that, I suppose a 5% swing's not insignificant, but it's certainly not a tidal shift in attitudes towards where people are living, and a rush, if you like, to move out to the sticks, as the media has reported.
No, I think it's, for a lot of people that may not be practical, even though maybe they can work more often remotely or from home, we're being encouraged to go back to work at certain points as well. So, a lot of people are very attached to where their home is, and maybe they don't want to just, give up on that wholesale and go somewhere else, but it's about making the most of what you have and making changes to suit you. And I think it's perfectly possible to access the outside, even within the city. So it doesn't have to be one thing or another. And again, it's this issue of, what suits the individual as well. Like you say, there's a lot of divergent experiences there.
Ben, going back once again to your experience as a student, and the curtains never opened. You starved yourselves of daylight, and we all now understand the SAD syndromes, the seasonally affected depression, and also health issues. That if you don't get enough sunlight, you can become vitamin deficient, and that can lead to all sorts of health problems. Now, do you think that lockdown has actually deprived people of daylight if they live in a home that doesn't have large enough windows? Is it sufficient to have actually impacted on people's vitamin D intake through sunlight, do you feel?
Well, again, it's going to depend on the home that someone lives in. We kind of keep saying this, but everyone's experience of lockdown has been so different. And yeah, you may live in perhaps an old converted house that does have tiny windows, and or you might be in a basement flat, for example. And in those sort of scenarios, absolutely, I can imagine it having had a big impact. But obviously, if you live in perhaps a new build apartment with full floor-to-ceiling windows, lots of glazing, you might have had the other problem, which is you've got too much glazing, and actually your flat's getting far too hot, and you're struggling with thermal comfort. And that brings with it its own set of kind of psychological problems. We know we've all experienced that horrible feeling of being stuck in a hot room, and that's a really unpleasant feeling too. So it really does depend on the situation. I think we were quite lucky, obviously, that lockdown happened, seemed to sort of coincide with the start of spring, and actually the weather was amazing. So we were all kind of quite keen to get out for our daily hour of exercise anyway. But yeah, I certainly think if you are living in a house now where there is kind of low levels of daylight, it's a really good opportunity to look at ways to improve that, and whether that's something as simple as putting in roof lights or adding a kind of some sort of glazed extension or some almost a kind of solarium type sunroom. There's lots of ways in which an architect can help you bring more light into a home, and as you mentioned, it's just so important. It affects everything from kind of our circadian rhythms, which affect how much sleep we get. A really interesting study actually, where there was a group of office workers in an office with zero daylight and a group of workers in an office with lots of daylight. And in the office with no daylight, they're actually getting about 46 minutes less sleep per night on average over the duration of the study. So we really didn't. Well, so they were getting no daylight at work, but it was impacting their sleep at home. So it really does hit home the point of just how important daylight is for us. And you can imagine if you're getting nearly an hour's less sleep a night, the impact that could have on your mental health and your happiness is enormous.
That's fascinating.
I think Ben makes a great point there as well, in that our needs for our home change across the year. And so now we're going into the autumn and winter, and we're going to be spending more time indoors. So it might be that people identify a completely different set of needs to ones they've identified in the spring. And it's really useful to have that long-term understanding of how you use your home across all 12 months of the year, so you can design changes in your home that are going to be sustainable and suitable in the long term.
Yeah, and having an experienced designer on board who can help you understand, as I mentioned, that very fine balance between sunlight and overheating. If you're getting an experienced architect on board, they will be able to help you steer you down that path, make sure that you're getting kind of the best of both worlds.
So going back to the research, and in fact the next discussion point, many people who responded said they are planning on making changes to their home and certainly have thought about making changes. And the evidence I have seen anecdotally from talking to planning authorities is that there is a significant increase in the number of applications. Builders seem to be extremely busy adapting and improving people's homes. So there definitely seems to be afoot a bit of a home improvement or alteration trend. Would you each like to give 3 examples of how you might adapt your home to respond to the changing needs that have emerged over recent months?
Sure. I mean, for me, as an architect, I would really encourage people to engage with the kind of physical elements of the design and the home, consider what makes them happier and kind of personalized changes to their happiness. But fundamentally, we can kind of bring it back to a set of things that we know tend to make us happier as human beings. We've touched upon, so bringing in more daylight would be probably number 1. Getting the materials right, so that might be bringing in greenery, plants, nature. It might be bringing in kind of more tactile materials, or as Ellie was mentioning at the start, materials which reflect perhaps more who you are as a person as well. And some people might like bright, shiny, sparkly things. Other people might want a kind of nice reclaimed wooden floor or something like that. So it really depends who you are as a person, but fundamentally paying attention to those things can make a difference. And then if I had to say a third point, probably go back to that point of comfort and physical comfort. It's something that we perhaps overlook sometimes, I would say. We live in a bit of an Instagram world right now where we look at pictures and we think, well, that looks beautiful, so it must be a great place to live. But actually, if that place gets freezing cold in the winter, boiling hot in the summer, if there's no acoustic comfort, it could be really noisy at night time, might be by a busy road and not have double, triple glazing, whatever it is. These things have a huge impact on our quality of life, and they're things that we need to consider when we're sort of trying to design a happier home.
Very interesting, Ben. Ellie, what are your thoughts? What would your 3 areas that people should consider be?
I really like Ben's recommendations, and I think some of mine lead on from those, but they're kind of about the process of thinking about changes. I'm a psychologist. I guess my first recommendation would be to consider kind of the individual needs of your household. So like Ben was saying, it's easy to get caught up in a trend or what someone else thinks is fashionable, but it's useful to think about whether it works in the context of your life and what you need from your home. And to kind of achieve that, I guess my second point is, I am a researcher, so I would suggest that people be researchers about their own experiences at home. So maybe keep a diary of kind of where you go and how you feel in your home across like a day or a week. Maybe observe what the people around you or who you live with are doing. How are they interacting with spaces? And through that, I think it's the third point, which is I think you can identify both maybe positive things you really already like about your home and you want to build on and enhance, and also pain points or things you don't like and things you want to minimize or remove. Because there may be things that you really love about your home and you want to make more of them or expand them in addition to just taking away something you don't like. So it can be a happy story as well, I think.
And Ben, are there any specific functions that you within the practice have identified that people seem to want? I mean, one would assume that sort of home offices are an area in demand. I have heard that home gyms, interestingly, home gym equipment was apparently the number 1 sale item during lockdown. So the nation decided to get healthy, which is quite interesting. Any other particular trends through the changes in patterns of lifestyle?
That's really interesting. Yeah, obviously the home office is a big thing, and having that separation of space is vital, as Ellie was talking about, so that we can actually separate out the different functions of our day. Because for some of us, I've been in that situation in a small flat. My living room is kind of my relaxing space. It's also my working space. So having that separation function is something that's really coming forward. Obviously home gyms, and again, people ideally don't want that to be in their living room. They'd like a separate space for that. So perhaps that does mean extending the home, or, you know, adding a garage that can become a kind of multifunction space. But I think that's really what it comes down to is actually more adaptable spaces. People have realized that their home needs to be a bit of a chameleon, and it needs to take on a number of different jobs and tasks. So it might be that, you know, you've seen how many people have taken on things that started painting and things like that during lockdown. So perhaps your garage might be converted into part gym, part painting studio, I don't know, part music rehearsal space, get a drum kit in there, whatever your kind of penchant is. But I think we're seeing homes becoming far more adaptable. As I mentioned in the survey that we did, one of the things that people did highlight was just a desire for more space. So it might not sound hugely exciting or innovative, but I can absolutely see a lot of people extending their homes as well, and seeing this as a really good opportunity. If it's something they've been thinking about doing for a while, now probably is the time that a lot of people are going to want to extend their home and get a bit more space in there.
So if you are thinking of extending, and you mentioned conversion as well, you know, where might you find the space? What sort of things should people be thinking about? Talking first of all about conversions, for instance.
In terms of physically in the home?
Yes, so people are thinking they need more spaces. I'm thinking in lofts, perhaps.
Well, that's the two options really, are either out or up, and it will depend on your specific situation, your home. Some homes are better suited to building outwards, some homes are better suited to building upwards. There's obviously things to consider with both. For example, if you extend out the back, does that mean you reduce your garden space? We've spent quite a lot of this conversation talking about the importance of nature, the importance of gardens, but it may well be that actually, you know, an architect can work with you to help you get that outdoor space back and put a green space on the roof and have it really nicely detailed. So actually that can become a really lovely space. You can go out and eat your breakfast out there, or do your yoga out there, or whatever it might be. So there's ways in which we can kind of get space back, both outwards and upwards, and I think it's really important to consider both.
And for those people who really just don't have the option to extend or convert, perhaps they live in an apartment or a block where they can't make any changes to the property for whatever reason, listed status or conservation area, etc. Is there any way of creating more space from what you already have? Well,
it's about, in that situation, I think it's about making space more livable, more usable, and I think architects we're trained to be problem solvers. So for me, a kind of a point I would like to get across is that architects can add value, not just in a sense of financial value to your home, but they can really add value to your life and to the way you use a space. So it might be things like coming up with really clever storage solutions. If you can store 30% of your belongings and get them out of your flat, or, you know, into somewhere hidden away in your flat, that can free up loads more space for you to use in a different way, and effectively, while you're not adding to the footprint of your home, can make your home much more usable and a much nicer place to live.
Ellie, have you got any advice for people to how to understand how they can develop a design brief for what they need from their home, you know, to identify what their changing requirements are and how they might meet that?
Well, like I suggested, I think it's really nice if people could spend a little bit of time just thinking about how they use their home, because often I think we just kind of go around using our home without thinking about it. But actually maybe to devote a little bit of time to maybe just writing down, you know, what it is you like and how it makes you feel, and what you don't like and how that makes you feel as well. Also talk to other people, you know, maybe get an outsider perspective. And so that could be discussing it with an architect, also other people if you live with others, you know, what their consensus is, so that there's some kind of agreement. But also you'll have those kind of personal experiences and feelings, but by talking it through with an architect, you'll get a sense of what you can actually do to alleviate those problems in the first place, or, you know, make the most of what you have, like Ben is saying.
Ben, if you are planning on making some home improvements or remodeling what you have or adding more space, what should your first steps be?
Well, you can speak to the Royal Institute of British Architects. They've got a service called Find an Architect service, and this is supported by their client services team. So what that will really help you to do is find an architect who's right for you, right for your project, right for your location. May have a lot of experience in your local area or in your type of project. So the best thing to do is get in touch with those guys.
Excellent. Now, I'm very interested of your own experiences during lockdown, if you don't mind sharing with us whether or not you were presumably both working from home during lockdown.
Yes.
Has it in any way impacted on your own experience and the way you've used your home? And if so, have you actually responded to that in any way or thought about responding to it by adapting your home? Ellie, perhaps you'd like to go first.
Yeah, I live in a pretty small one-bedroom flat. It's rented, so I don't have the opportunity to make too many physical changes. But for the first few months of lockdown, I was working with my laptop on the kitchen table. And then after a while, I realized this just wasn't going to work for me anymore. So I invested in like a leaning desk. So I did some DIY. I took down some bookshelves that have been there, and I never liked them anyway, but somehow I would just kind of forgot about them until it was really getting a bit too much. But one thing I love about my flat is the really big windows, and it's the reason I decided to live here in the first place. So there have been kind of pluses and minuses. I've had a wonderful view, but I did have to make some changes to my working arrangements so I could actually work effectively.
And Ben, how about you?
Well, yeah, like Ellie, I also live in fairly small flats, my fiance and I. We do own it, so thankfully we are allowed to make some changes, which has given us a bit more freedom to do some stuff. But yeah, I'd say during the early part of lockdown, it was really, as we discussed earlier, it was more just about kind of bumbling through lockdown and trying to find ways to use the space most efficiently. And we, like Ellie, we experimented with a few different ways of working. Our living space did become a home gym. It became a space to do things like painting and all of those kinds of stuff, things that we've already talked about. And it was about trying to find creative ways to change that space and make it feel a bit different as well, from like the daytime when we were working to the evening when we were relaxing. So for us, that's actually about moving the kitchen table around during the daytime, and then it just made the space feel like a completely different room. And just those sort of creative things are really helpful. But actually, as lockdown started to ease, we decided that we did want to make some changes to our home. So we got a lovely builder in to put a load of tiles up in our kitchen for us. It's completely changed the feel of that space. It always amazes me, like such a small intervention, just putting some tiles up can really have a big impact on how a space feels. It's now brighter, it looks much sharper, just feel better in that space. And we got a lot of shelving put up as well. I've already talked about the importance of storage, but just getting some extra shelving put up has just freed up lots more space within our home too. So small changes like that can make a big difference.
So you've both invested in small changes. Ellie, you're renting. Ben, you're an owner, but you've both spent money. You've both been out and spent some money on home improvements. So it does back up the idea that, you know, the nation has gone out and adapted its homes, albeit on a smaller scale, depending on your means and, of course, where you live. Ben, expanding on Ellie's point about developing a design brief, because I feel that it's fundamental that, you know, before you spend money with an architect or a designer, you really have spent time thinking about what you want. And Ellie's interestingly said that think about how you live. I mean, how do you then develop that into a design brief that's going to really give an architect or architectural designer an idea of what you're looking for?
Well, I think it is absolutely about working out exactly what is right for you, what you feel you need, and what your requirements are, both spatially, aesthetically, in lots of different ways. But this is another way in which an architect can add value, actually sitting down and working with you to get a better understanding of what your brief might look like. And most people don't have a huge amount of experience in designing homes, things like that. An architect will bring that to the table, and they'll actually be able to spot a lot of kind of potential pitfalls, problems down the line. And actually, you know, we've all worked grand designs where they don't use an architect and things go horribly wrong. But hopefully an architect can help you to avoid some of those issues and actually not just improve the quality of the final design of your home and make your final home a happier place to be, but actually improve that process of the design, the consultation, the construction, make that all be a little bit smoother and a little bit happier too. So I think that's really where those skills add some value as well.
And finally, do you both, this is a question probably for Ellie first, you know, do you see any sort of long-term patterns emerging from this that you think are likely to stay? If you were to sort of get your crystal ball out and say, you know, what will the longer-term impacts of this lockdown and this transition be for a typical British household?
I think certainly they're working a bit more flexibly, whether that's working from home or working remotely or, you know, whatever kind of new configuration for home and work-life balance will be. Something that's something I see that might persist after COVID is gone, one hopes. But really what that looks like, I think it depends on the individual person. But certainly I think people have become, through spending more time at home forcibly, they've become a bit more aware, it seems to me, of how important their home is to them. And this feeling of, being safe and comfortable in your home, it being somewhere where you can go to escape from the outside world. So if changes to the home can facilitate that, I think that's all to the good. Excellent.
And Ben, your crystal ball gazing, do you see any perhaps unspotted patterns emerging from this in the way we live?
Well, it's been really interesting for me to see the kind of new trends in terms of transport and how we move around. So obviously sales of bicycles and bookings of bicycle servicing went through the roof, like hundreds of % increase in both during lockdown. And I think we've already discussed the importance of being active and exercise and the rise in home gyms. I do hope that people really continue with that trend, and it would be great to see more people out being active. Of course, this might mean changes to our home. This might mean actually we need spaces to store more bikes or things like that. And that extra space we use for a car may down the line not be needed, and that could free up extra space, which you could potentially convert into a study or another bedroom or something like that. So I can imagine, those sort of changes in the way we live our life will have an impact on our homes, absolutely.
Yeah, because there's a lot of uncertainty about now going out to socialise and where you can even do that, and with how many people. It seems to change by the day now. So, if we're getting to a point where maybe people feel it's safer to, socialise with small groups at home, maybe that changes what people need from their home for entertaining, for social purposes. So, that could be something that people haven't had to think about so much before.
Predicting a return of the cocktail bar in the corner of the living room.
Maybe.
You don't have one?
Not yet. It's on the wish list.
Well, look, that's been a fascinating discussion, and there's been some insights there that had never occurred to me at all. I think it's been a very, very interesting discussion. So thank you both very much for your time. For anybody who is interested in understanding more about it, I'm sure there'll be some more information on the research piece at architecture.com. Certainly, if you are looking for a registered architecture or chartered architectural practice, then the Find an Architect service that Ben mentioned earlier is the place to start, and you will find that at architecture.com too. Thank you both very much for taking part.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.